Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, on this magnificent Monday for what is going to be nothing short of another jam-packed daily market update. We've not been releasing daily over the festive period, but that is coming to a wrap. Of course, it is New Year's Eve tomorrow, then New Year's Day. New Year's Day will be totally back to normal with multiple videos coming out a day. And of course, the dailies coming out daily. Got a number of interesting things to do in this video. We're going to start things off with some good news, and that is in regards to Hong Kong potentially proposing a Bitcoin reserve. What we're going to see, and I believe, who was it that was talking about this the other day? I think it was Goldman Sachs. I'll see if I can find that. They were talking actually about how they believe there's going to be multiple countries doing that. My play on that is Bitcoin miners. I think Bitcoin's miners are going to offer a higher ROI than Bitcoin. Just my own opinion, and we have some miners in the Patreon that you guys can check out. We're also going to be releasing our entirely own platform. Obviously, we've got the website, allincrypto.com, but a kind of academy next year, which is only a few days away. So do look out for that. So we're going to be starting off on some good news, and the reason being is because then we're going to look at the potential for downside for Bitcoin in the shorter term, and we'll be looking at, and there's been a number of traders out there that I respect that are actually highlighting a head and shoulders for Bitcoin that could take it to exactly where there is a CME gap at around about 78k. Now, this sounds horrific, but really, is it? I don't believe so. I think there's some ominous signs when it comes to Bitcoin in the short term, but what I really teach here is that as an investor, 99.9% of you should only really be paying attention to the big time frames and the trend that we're in, what phase of a market we're in. I believe we're in phase 2, certainly for Bitcoin, for Ethereum, for many altcoins out there. And pay attention to that and don't try and trade every top and bottom, because why I'm showing this also is to really highlight what are you going to do. Okay, there's a technical pattern that potentially has merit. What happens if it doesn't play out? You know, and this is why I encourage people. We don't give any financial advice, but what I will say, and I'll say this with, my chest stuck out, is that 99.9% of you shouldn't try and trade the market. You shouldn't even try and become a trader, and that you should stick to investing. You'll make more than enough money in the crypto space. It really does offer an amazing opportunity. So we've got a lot to get into. We'll also be looking at the charts, of course. Let's start things off with some Hong Kong news. So Hong Kong proposes Bitcoin in reserves amidst regulatory constraint with China. A Hong Kong legislator has proposed integrating Bitcoin into the national reserves as part of a strategy to bolster financial security. This move is under consideration due to Hong Kong's one country, two system policy, of course with China, which allows it some autonomy from mainland China, stringent cryptocurrency regulation. The proposal aligns with Hong Kong's efforts to become a leader in crypto licensing, as highlighted in a recent report from the People's Bank of China Financial Stability Report. So this is interesting. I'm just going to quickly see if I can find... here it is. So this is from Goldman Sachs. Remember, Jamie Dimon of Goldman Sachs has been traditionally quite against Bitcoin. But Goldman Sachs sees major multinationals adding Bitcoin to their balance sheet. So this isn't specifically in regards to countries, but this was interesting. What I'm actually going to do is play this clip because it is an interesting clip to play. And then we're going to get into some ominous signs technically, but do not fear because Allincrypto is here. There's no point in only paying attention to news that fulfills your bias. And in the grand scheme of things, okay, if this does play out on the short term, and I'm not a believer, I don't have high conviction that it will, but we're going to show you why people think it is. A couple of traders that I really respect. The main thing for me, why I don't think I'm not that confident, is because it's against the trend. The trend is an uptrend, clearly. But if it does play out, what are you going to do? What's the ramifications? It's good to be prepared for things so that if they do come to fruition, you already knew and you know how to kind of react, and you could have seen it coming. There's a degree of salvation in that, I guess. So let's go ahead and play this clip from Goldman Sachs talking about what they believe. Remember, Jamie Dimon historically been against Bitcoin whilst secretly meddling around with it and the broader crypto space consistently because they're corrupt, plain and simple. But let's go ahead and play this.
Could we see truly a lot of major multinationals putting Bitcoin on their balance sheet and that kind of thing?
I think it's conceivable, yes. And I think as we've started to see, over the last year and a half, a lot more clarity, probably outside of the US. I think there's obviously been a big spike in the valuations across the whole crypto suite, as we've seen since the US presidential elections. That obviously is driven by what we expect will be probably a more favorable regulatory backdrop, and that gives confidence to kind of the institutions more broadly.
Could we see
So just a really short and sweet one there, but that was obviously from Goldman Sachs themselves. We are going to see a kind of a crypto arms race take place. Let's talk about an ominous technical sign on the short term that I don't think affects the broader trend that we're in, and we'll talk about that. We'll talk about, okay, if this does play out, what does it mean? Where does it take it? Does it invalidate the bull market? I don't believe so, but this is from Peter Brandt. This is a head and shoulders top pattern. It might complete and take Bitcoin's price to $78,000. It might fail with a thrust higher, or it might morph into something else. But as it stands right now, it is a head and shoulders top and must be chartist dealt with for what it is. And that's what we're going to do. So he's basically said, even though it's here, it might not play out and it might turn into something else. And that seems very much like he's dancing around it. But as technical analysts, and I align with Peter, and of course the Crypto Sniper, who recently put out a video saying that he also is showing 4 reasons why Bitcoin's likely going to sell off. He's actually included a 5 in regards to a shooting star. If anybody that stood Japanese candlesticks will know what that is. But I want to reiterate what Peter's saying there. For me, and there is also a CME gap down here in that sort of region. For me, I'm not confident on this, simply because this is very clearly, this is Bitcoin CME futures, a very strong uptrend. You're betting against that, and even if it does play out, actually, it's no big deal for me. Okay, altcoins will suffer a little bit, more time to accumulate on some of your favorite altcoins. It ultimately doesn't disrupt the broader trend, but it's worth paying attention to in case it does play out, because then I'm going to bring up a biblical quote about, sort of telling people before something takes place so that actually, you're not surprised. But Peter Brandt obviously highlighting this. Let's look at the head and shoulders first of all, and we'll use, let's go on meetings, this chart to look at the head and shoulders. So Bitcoin very clearly an uptrend. Remember, guys, this doesn't affect anything on the macro. We've got lots of technical confluence. 4 or 5 reasons why we think Bitcoin is going to go higher and is in a clear uptrend. But in the short term, there is definitely what could turn out to be an inverse head and shoulders here. You can play around with this a little bit. So that's not quite accurate. So we'll get the same sort of price that Peter Brandt has got here, or thereabouts. Depends where you want to put your neckline. Is this going to turn into an inverse head and shoulders? And is this ultimately going to see Bitcoin roll down to the sort of high 70K range? It's possible. The important thing is, where does that put you in regards to the trend? And you're still very clearly in what I believe is a strong uptrend. Even with this pullback, if it is to take place, it's no big deal in my opinion. And certainly, this sort of running you back into the 70K range would really just be taking you back to sort of where you broke out. There is a CME gap. It's worth me highlighting here also. So there are multiple ominous signs. And that's kind of why I'm highlighting this. We can see this CME gap here. The thing is with gaps on charts, the problem is Bitcoin trades 24/7. It doesn't trade like the stock market does, which will all eventually trade 24/7. But there is a gap here also that would kind of align with the target that the CME Bitcoin futures is or the inverse head and shoulders could potentially give you. So do watch out for this as a scenario. Obviously, the sniper chiming in here, talking about 4 charts for why Bitcoin may trade down through New Year 2025. The making of the 618. So that's an expansive fib from March's highs down to August yen trade lows. ascending structure. So ascending structures, you don't want to see in an uptrend. You want to see them descending because that's how you pull back and sort of consolidate. Bear flag. Yeah. Obviously inverse head and shoulders, and he's also pointing out a monthly shooting star. So there are a number of signs that might lead you to believe Bitcoin might come down. The question you've then got to answer is, well, how do you manage that as an investor? Are you going to sell your portfolio to hopefully buy altcoins and Bitcoin cheaper? Well, what happens if it doesn't pay out? Not only are you crystallizing a loss or crystallizing your gains, which means it's going to be taxed. If it doesn't play out, you're potentially going to wipe out and reduce your holdings by, who knows, certainly in the altcoin sector, 20, 30%, certainly if they rocket off of this. So just be very careful, but it's worth me highlighting because there are a number of ominous signs. My overall conviction, and just to comment on the CME gap, gaps don't always get filled. They often do. But for example, even with Bitcoin, if you look at this gap here, this got filled nearly 2 years later. So just because there's a gap, it's not a reason to sort of get out. There are multiple signs sort of showing you that actually this is quite toppy. Inverse head and shoulders, you've got sort of a broadening ascending structure. Obviously the gap is a factor. Is there stuff on the macro like the debt ceiling and how that might play out in the new year to come? We'll see. I would honestly, and what I'm doing, I'll tell you personally, is nothing. You know, I'm ultimately in this for the broader trend, which is very clearly still an uptrend, but it's worth us highlighting potential downside that may be to come and watching it as a potential scenario. You know, this is Peter Brandt also calling out the fact that if you believed every gap got filled, you'd still be short the S&P futures from 2013. So it's not always the case. So just pay attention to it as a potential scenario. In my opinion, it's something that I'm not going to react to. The reason being is this is very clearly an uptrend. I expect continuation in the trend. If this was to pull back here, it's still, you know, the uptrend would still very much be in play. And I think that would be a blessing, not a curse, in my opinion. So we just wanted to get a video out there sort of covering this. I've had lots of people asking me about it. And there is very clearly some sort of technical inklings on the smaller time frames that do perhaps lead you to believe Bitcoin might pull back. However, you're against the trend here. What are you going to do? And that's the question you've got to ask. If you think Bitcoin's going to 79k, okay, well, are you going to sell? Are you going to get out your positions? What happens if it doesn't? Remember, this is an uptrend, and altcoins move fast. You're crystallizing a loss. You're getting a taxable event. Most people are anyway, depending on, of course, where you live. And you're also running the risk of being wrong and actually dwindling your holdings down. And this is why ultimately our mantra is we want to be in for the bull market, out for the bear. That's what we try and do. In for the uptrend, out for the downtrend. It's that simple. We don't try and time every top and every high. You only need to get that wrong a few times. I've seen many people do it, even since, you know, Bitcoin sort of bottom in 2023. If you try and time every top and every high, or every high and every low, it's my opinion, you're not going to be able to do it. I've seen the best traders try and fail miserably. I ultimately don't think that the masses are equipped for that. So, interesting news from Hong Kong. Interesting that Goldman Sachs really changing their tune. We looked at a couple of ominous signs. We're massively bullish on the market, but we will pay attention every now and then to things that are playing out in the shorter time frames, and look at them as potential scenarios and ultimately ask the question, well, does this change the macro view that we have? And no, it doesn't. Bitcoin, in my opinion, is going into multiple hundreds of thousands. The altcoin market is really set to take place. If you guys haven't considered becoming a patron, go and check out last night's meeting. We looked at market psychology. And we related how we look at the markets and where the altcoin market is and what we think is to come for it. And there's just this great time ahead of us. But that doesn't mean that we sort of don't pay attention to things happening on the short term and potential scenarios. The reason we do that isn't because we necessarily care about them or we're trying to capitalize on them. It's more so because we're ultimately trying to analyze, does that affect the bigger bull market that we're in? And my opinion is no, even if it was to play out. It's a potential scenario. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section. That's it from me, guys. Thanks for watching. See you soon.